Today in the bunker, we're going to build a pump station for our water facility for Fallout or other post-apocalyptic games. Alright, so I had the vaguest notion of how I wanted the building to look, and I set out some size parameters and went ahead and cut myself out a base out of 1-inch foam. But you could use anything. You wouldn't have to base it up that high. It's just kind of my crazy vision of it. And then to get that rounded look on the corners, since I don't have a hot wire foam cutter, and I didn't want to try to freehand that with a knife, I took some of the white expanded foam and sort of harvested the corner pieces that had that rounded look, and we're going to incorporate those into our build. And all I did was just take those pieces and just make some measurements, and of course I cut these corners off and then figured out that I needed them to be taller, so then I had to go back and cut smaller pieces that fit, and of course the piece that had that edge was not nearly as wide, so we'll make it work. We have the technology. One of the reasons that I always talk about having a miniature handy when you build these things, so you can figure out, like my original dimensions, his entire base wouldn't go on there. So I moved everything back a bit, which is fine in this case because that's the back of the building, and I'm going to make this a closed building. It won't have an playable interior. I'm going to make that interior a separate piece because there's just too much going on in here, and a lot of it's supposed to be underground level anyway. So that'll be in the future. Right now we're just going to build something we can put on the table and fight around, and it should look pretty good, so we will get started. First thing I'm going to do is glue these pieces together. I'll get them affixed, and then we can set about trying to trim this top piece so that everything is a little straighter. I hate to do it without having them together because that's just extra eyeballing that I have to do, and as you can see, I'm not super great at that. So we're going to use some toothpicks or cocktail sticks or whatever you want to call them, and some PVA. So let me gather that all up and we'll get started. The biggest thing is just going to be lining up, let me trim that a little bit, lining up the corner edges so that they're kind of smooth, and as long as they're fairly close, that's fine. Level that off as best we can. And we just want that to be a fairly smooth transition there and keep that architectural detail of that rounded corner. So we're going to push our toothpick in there. Maybe we could do it straight. That might be good, eh? There we go. And we'll put a healthy dose of PVA on it. Okay, and that's obviously not super. Why does that keep pushing apart? Alright, let's we're just gonna kinda freestyle that without it for now. We'll add that later. I've never really worked with this white foam, so I guess it has some unique qualities. Alright, so we will glue these other ones together and continue on. Okay, so those are PVA'd while that's setting up. I've already pushed one in. I'm just going to push another one of these in at an angle. And we'll just kind of push that down in there. and that will give us a fair bit of strength. There we go. And that'll be covered up. Once we get to the finishing portion, we're going to smooth that out a little bit, and when we put our concrete texture on, you're not even going to be able to see it, so that'll be great. So I'm going to do the rest of these, and we'll continue on. Once you've got those together, then you can take your knife, and I suggest a fairly fresh blade, because this white foam seems to eat a blade really quick. And then we'll just kind of saw down here, and yeah, that makes that noise. Anyway, you get the idea, because I know that it sets people's teeth on edge. But anyway, just very carefully trim that down on either side. So we'll continue with that. Alright, so after some careful knife work, you can get it fairly even. Like I said earlier, once we get to the finishing phase of this, we'll use some spackle, and then we'll put our concrete texture on, and it'll cover up a multitude of our cutting sins. So I'm going to continue with that. One note, all your offcuts, some of them won't be salvageable, but a lot of them are, and especially if you later texture these with the concrete, they make fantastic scatter terrain for ruins to kind of add them in. So don't throw them away automatically. Right after a bit of trimming, I've got the 4 corner pieces fairly, this sort of match sets there, so 2 for, well, don't do that, 2 for each corner or side of the building, and then I've got them fairly squared off at the bottom and tried to match the heights and everything. So just make that all as even as you can. Like I said, a lot of it is going to get covered up in the finishing phase, so don't worry too much about it, but it's fairly straightforward. It's just a little bit of adjusting with your knife, cutting, trimming, whatever. Like here, I'm going to have to even this out. Just take a little bit off that middle so that it kind of sits in there, but not a problem. So what we'll do is get ready to cut out some more walls out of this material and start kind of assembling this whole thing. So we'll continue on. Alright, so I just pushed these onto this foam with a toothpick in between them. I don't have them glued yet. I just wanted to sort of mock it up and see how that's going to fit. And I think that's going to work pretty well. So what I'm going to do is cut some more of this foam to fit and fill in all of those gaps, because those can be straight. I just needed something with these corners on it to add that detail that I wanted. So I am going to make some measurements. We'll cut out some XPS foam and start fitting that in there. If you don't have that kind of foam, you could use more of that white foam. If you have like an old cooler or something that has a lot of big flat panels, that would work well. It's a little fiddly to work with, but it can be done. And I think we're going to get the hot glue gun and start going at it with that just to speed things up. So we will continue on. One thing I want to mention, if you aren't familiar with working with foam with your knife, you always try to use a really fresh blade. Take several cuts. Don't try to go through it all at once, especially something that's like this where it's an inch thick or more. It may take 3, 4, 5 cuts. Just take your time, make it as square as you can, and eventually you will get through there, and it's a lot better than trying to force it all the way. That's where you start to rip and tear and bust out chunks. So take your time and it will come out great. Alright, so we're going to test fit that first wall. And something else that occurred to me in putting this on is if I wanted to continue this detail along the top, I would have to harvest some more of that foam and start cutting out a bunch more of that. I don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do is have this wall be inset a little bit, and then this just becomes an architectural detail, and we'll have to figure out a way to kind of clean up that edge a little bit, or not. We can kind of have some rebar sticking out or whatever and have it look like it's chipped away. It is, you know, after all, in the apocalypse. So we will continue on with that, and that'll give kind of an interesting look to it, but we'll clean that all up as we go. So we will continue on. Okay, one thing I should note is as you go along, you start to hot glue all these pieces together. It's very helpful to do our toothpick slash cocktail stick. Push that in with the back of the hobby knife, and that really lends a great amount of strength to this. It's sort of surprising. So we will continue on. As an optional step, I'm kind of doing some gap filling and strengthening with some PVA along those outside joins. So I'm going to do that, let that set up, and then we'll get the roof on. And as we get ready to put on the roof, I put some blocks in here for that piece to sit down in. I also noticed that I got really off on that edge. So again, cautionary tale, try to do some measuring once in a while instead of just doing it like I do. Everything else looks fairly even except that one spot, so I guess we can write it off to shifting over time. It's the apocalypse after all. Yeah, we'll go with that. All right, so the roof, because of the way that I built the rest of the building's carcass, I'm going to make it sit down in there. I had to kind of cut it, measure and cut very specifically. If you used uniform pieces and actually used measurements, it would be awesome and probably assemble about 10 times easier. But I had to kind of make some relief cuts underneath to get this to sit down where I needed it to go, like that. So we're going to use the same glue and toothpicks, and we'll get that in there. Let me try to adjust this a little bit over here. And then we'll do some final sort of shaping and we'll get ready to texture it. So we'll continue on. Alright, so there's our carcass roughed together. I also noticed that I should have been a little more careful about how I place these corner bits because I've got wides on one end and narrows on the other. Cautionary tale. Also managed to cut myself, so that was good. So what I'm going to do is probably I'll take some paper and kind of smooth out this top. We'll use some Mod Podge and lay that on there so that when we go to texture this, it doesn't have these huge gaps. So we'll continue on with that. Before we do the roof, I added a piece here on the end because there are going to be some large pipes coming out and I needed to have space for them to actually be on the concrete. There'll be some smaller pipes at the other end, but I don't believe we're going to have to add anything for that. So anyway, we'll continue on. I've cut out a piece of paper that's going to cover up all of this. What I'm going to do is just attach it with some Mod Podge. I'm going to put some on here in steps and paint this correspondingly on the top, and that'll harden the whole thing up and kind of even this all out. So when we go to texture it, it'll look kind of organic in the sense of it's all one thing. So anyway, let's get started with that. And I'm just going to use a foam brush to do this. And I'm using Mod Podge mixed with paint, but you know, that's completely optional. You could use just straight up Mod Podge and that would be fine. So as that's drying, I also went and put spackle on those joins around all four of the sides there and added a set of stairs and some kind of protective wings there. I glued a piece of drink carton underneath it to give it some stability, and then of course pinned that piece there and just glued that all on with PVA. I'm going to add some of the large pipes, and these come with all kinds of writing and everything on them. I just file that off and then rough the whole thing up with some sandpaper. It kind of hazes it, and that'll allow the paint to stick a lot better too once we get to where we're painting it. So, all right, we'll continue on with that. One of the other things I do to get rid of the mold lines instead of just sanding and sanding and sanding is you just take a sharp knife, hold it perpendicular, you know, kind of at a 90-degree angle to the mold line, and then just scrape it. and that will scrape that mold line right off of there, and then you can smooth that out with some sandpaper. This is how things were smoothed for centuries before the invention of sandpaper, so it is a tried and true technique. I added a double door at the front. I just took some drink carton and cut out an appropriately sized shape, and see, that's very door-like. And I'm going to add some pieces of this plastic rod. It's kind of a flat square, and I'm going to build a door frame. And then I've got a piece of this half round stuff that's going to go in the middle, and then I'll make some kind of a door handle. And then on the back, we're going to add, very similarly, we're going to add an access door for equipment. I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to build a frame around it, and then I will also have a piece of this beam sticking out like you'd have like an overhead crane ride on, because obviously whatever equipment they put in there, a lot of it's too big to go in that front door, so they'll have an access door for maintenance and changing equipment out and whatnot. And then also, as a completely optional step, I printed out these pieces for an HVAC system that we're going to add to the roof for a little bit of extra detailing, and we'll scratch build some other things and add them on too. So we will continue. Right, and there's a little closer shot of our door. I added a door panel handle thing out of some more styrene, a piece of styrene rod. I drilled a couple of holes with our trusty pin vise and inserted some bent wire like a pull handle and just super glued that whole mess on there. So we will continue on the back and make our garage door. So we've got our front door on, we've got our back door on, a little piece there as I throw it around. We're going to add some pipes on this end. We're going to add some smaller pipes on this end. Probably put some junction boxes and some other things. We're going to put some HVAC things on the roof. But I want to go ahead and get this textured. And what I'm going to use is unsanded grout. I put it in a garlic shaker that was empty because garlic is delicious and I eat a lot of it. And I'm going to use this scenic cement that I found. I had bought this a long time ago and forgot about it. I had the sprayer for it, but I can't find that, which is probably a blessing because I'd probably make a bigger mess. So I'm going to brush this on, and then we're going to apply this good stuff. And then I'm going to go try and find a sprayer that I can spray some of this through as to mist over it and seal it. And this will basically make a concrete finish because it's just literally concrete. So hopefully, and I put down this plastic, words are hard, I put down this plastic tablecloth because this stuff gets everywhere. I've seen Luke over on Luke's APS use it, and he's got a fantastic channel, by the way. And his advice was not incorrect because just getting it into this thing, I managed to get it all over the place. So you definitely want to have something down that you can fold up and not care about once it's done. So I'm going to start with, open this, and this came from Tom's Trains, which has been closed for a while, sadly. I miss Tom's Trains. Okay, this stuff is very watery, but it brushes on, and so we will, let's kind of do a, well, we'll just do the top, I guess, just as a test piece. I'm not sure how long before this stuff sets up, so I don't want to get too far ahead of it. Okay, well that seems to apply easily enough. It's messy. Very messy. Alright, so we'll let that set up a little bit. I'm going to do some more of this and we will continue on. Well, I figured out I don't really have anything to spray with, and the instructions do say you can brush it on. So I let that glue set up for a little bit, and then I just basically am hitting it with another light coat of some more of this scenic cement. That tends to smooth it out, so that seems to work pretty good. It's a horrendous mess, but I think when we're done we'll probably be pretty happy with the result. So I'm going to continue on this way, and this is either going to be really cool or it's going to be an abject failure. Either way you'll know, and you'll know either to do it this way or not do it this way. So the suspense builds, and we'll continue. Alright, so one god-awful mess later. I've got this completely coated, tried to smooth it out. There's some lumpy spots I'm not happy with. It did not texture the roof quite like I'd hoped, so we're going to put a bunch of crap on top of there and try to hide some of that. Probably shouldn't have done this working with it for the first time. I've never even tested it, but hey, what the heck? What's the worst that could happen? So I think it'll be okay. I got the gray so that it would look like concrete once it dries, and touch these spots up as we go. So we're going to let that dry. I suspect it's going to take a while, and we will continue. I noticed that as it was drying, it picks up the directionality of your brush strokes. So I'm taking some more of this scenic cement. It's kind of what's on this plate with the random dust that fell into it, almost like a textured paint, and I'm just going back over it and stippling the entire thing. So maybe it won't have that much directionality when it dries. I want it to look like poured concrete, not something brushed on. Or maybe I'm just making a bigger mess. There's no way to tell. So we'll keep going. Also did some random pieces of scrap. I figured while I was in here making a huge mess, I might as well go ahead and test some of those. So we'll see. Maybe they'll be good scatter terrain.